we'll get started. My name's Dan. I work for a company called Interaction Learning and Development. We are a Bristol-based organisation, but we work across the UK and Europe as well. I've been set up really well for this session, so there's been a couple of themes that have started to come out already. Saj talked this morning about vulnerability. Pretty much my session is about vulnerability and how you can use that to make your organisations and your individuals more resilient. The other thing is that Zena's just talked about the power of reflection as well. So my gift to you as part of this session as well is that I'm going to give you some forced reflection time. I'm loving the enthusiasm in the room as far as that goes as well for some forced reflection time, okay? Another quick thing as well, I'd like to throw in a few bits and pieces that may prove helpful. I'm from New Zealand, I'm not from Australia. The easiest way to tell the difference between a Kiwi and an Aussie is that an Australian talks through their nose like this, and that a Kiwi, we don't move our top lip and we mix up our vowels as well. So we talk like this. There you go. So, getting started as far as this goes. What I'm going to do first off is I'm going to ask that you make sure that you're at close proximity to someone else to have a chat a bit later on. But I'm going to show you a series of slides, some words on the slides. And all I want you to do is think about words, feelings, thoughts, sometimes even people or roles that you associate with this word. And I'll just ask you to jot that stuff down in front of you. So I hope that everyone's got a paper and pen in front of them. I'm going to give you a couple of opportunities as far as that goes. This is where we first find out whether I can use the clicker properly. So your first word coming up now is that one. It looks really good on that big screen as well, I reckon. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. Thoughts, feelings, words, themes that you associate with that. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll jump in there as far as that goes. So recognizing that a session about vulnerability is going to have a bit of vulnerability in it as well, and I encourage you to kind of lean into that place that's a bit uncomfortable. I would encourage you to turn to the person next to you and talk to them about the words, the feelings, the thoughts, the things you have written. So I'll give you kind of a minute to have a chat to the person next to you. Just give them the list of stuff you've got written there. Okay, so I'll jump in there quickly. Again, in the interest of the fact that a vulnerability session is not really a vulnerability session unless we make ourselves vulnerable as well. I don't have the shared mic people in the room. Hit me. What words have you got? Oh, I do have a shared mic. I take it all back. There is a microphone here.
Letting yourself or others down.
Nice. Letting people down. I love it. What else have we got? Wasted potential. Oh, yeah, I love it. Good stuff. Yeah. What else have we got? Game of Thrones. Nice, yes. I love a good pop culture reference. Fantastic. Hello. Nice. Great, so not standing up for things I believe in. Brilliant. What else have you got for me? Great. Overlooking things, being embarrassed about it. Brilliant. No pressure for this side of the room, but this side of the room's doing quite well at the moment. What else have you got for me? Great. So it requires kind of other people to input that as far as that goes. Brilliant. Thanks, Claudia.
It's like a limiting feeling, so it stops you from doing other things.
Great. Yeah. So it cuts you down as far as options that are there. Any more for any more?
Memorable.
Memorable. Oh yeah, so it sticks with you. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I'm just going to take a moment with that as well. Yeah, brilliant. There was someone else over here as well, I thought. Internalizing, yeah. So I hang on to that stuff, yeah, and it's all going on for me inside. Hidden, great. So it's very personal as far as that goes. This is a definition. It sounds like we're all over it as far as that goes, but there's something painful. So again, even as those words begin to be relayed within a room environment like this, there's some real pain associated with that. We've talked about that idea of guilt, so feeling bad about things, and a shortcoming. So there's some sort of shortcoming in myself, impropriety, that sort of stuff, yeah? I kind of go back to those messages that you're given, whether implicitly or explicitly from your parents. My mother's kind of go-to was, it's not that we're angry, it's that we're disappointed. You know, that I would rather you beat me about the face and neck, mother, than tell me that you're disappointed in me again. That kind of stuff, yeah? Cool. Happy with that as a process? Ready for your next slide? Brilliant. Your next word. So again, same process as before. Take a few moments with yourself. Use that reflection time. Jot down some words, some feelings, some thoughts that you associate with that word. And once you've done that time, then you've got an opportunity to talk to the person sitting next to you about that stuff as well. Okay, so if you're finished with your list, feel free to turn to the person next to you and have that conversation. And I'll come back to you in about a minute's time.
Use a mic, because otherwise when we look...
You're doing a great job. I'm not making it easy because I'm going to go and these.
No. Well, I was told that we need to use this recording session. Yeah. So I'm hoping. Is this on? Yeah. Yeah, it's on. So maybe try to finish.
I will. Yeah. I'll do my best.
Yeah. I'll do mine.
We'll get there together. Yeah. Okay, so it sounds as though the volume's kind of gone down again. My enthusiasm for the words and the thoughts that you've got throwing has been slightly tempered, and that the microphone is useful because the session's being recorded. So if we can get the microphone to you, that's brilliant. If we can't get the microphone to you, biggest voices. So take the cue from Matthew at the back with a big booming voice, and we'll see how we go. So, words, feelings, thoughts you associate with vulnerability. People close to the microphone, go.
So being very brave, I was saying that I was in a big car crash 2 years ago in August and had to have some therapy to deal with it. And the therapist kept saying to me, you dealt with it in the moment and then you've packed it all away because you won't allow yourself to be vulnerable. And that's why your my unconscious mind was ambushing me the whole time.
Brilliant.
So for me, it's been associated with having to be much, much braver, which was the word we were talking about.
Great, fantastic.
So he'd be very proud of me now.
Yeah. And thank you very much for sharing that as well. Thank you. What else have you got? I've stymied the creativity and the flow now with the microphone thing. Oh.
Feeling insecurity.
Great.
And facing your own insecurities as well.
Brilliant. So insecurity and facing that insecurity. I like it, yeah. What else have you got?
So very much exposed and open was kind of the words that were coming out here, which can kind of swing both ways. So in terms of open to new experiences and change, but also that feeling of exposure to being at risk and that precariousness that you might also feel. Yeah.
Right. So exposure and risk, two beautiful words to describe that. I love it. So again, this side of the room, no pressure, but we're 4-0 at the moment.
Yeah, so I put that it requires quite deep mutual trust if you're going to expose a vulnerability.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you, Ben. Great. So that kind of builds on that idea of trust. It's challenging to be vulnerable in situations where we don't feel that that's been pre-established. Great. Joe down the front.
So we talked about it not necessarily being something associated with leadership. As a leader, that culturally that's usually not associated with having vulnerabilities, because you're supposed to have the answers, be strong, have people follow you. And then we talked a bit about whether that actually needed to be the case, because vulnerability was a way of connecting with other people, so you could show your leadership through that.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Anything else that anyone would like to add as far as that goes before I flick to your definition? Are you doing this on purpose now? Oh, over here. Great. Yeah.
Don't show it at work.
So that's kind of building on that trust base. Your place to do that is at home where I'm safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Great. That's perfect. Yeah. Brilliant. So the definition that I found, which again echoes the kind of sentiment that you've given us throughout the afternoon. So a quality or state of being exposed, so you talked about that as exposure, the possibility of attack or harm either physically or emotionally. So obviously in this context, especially when we're talking about it in a work context, it's more around that kind of emotionally piece as far as that goes. Brilliant. So there's no point in me developing a workshop or talking about a workshop with you unless I decide to involve a bit of vulnerability in there as well. Interesting enough, as far as individual focusing on vulnerability in the first bit, there's something quite vulnerable about beginning a workshop, watching people leave the room as you begin your workshop, once Zena's finished hers, yeah. There's also something that is quite vulnerable about being filmed while giving a presentation or a workshop as well, yeah. But I'm reminded of a specific story. I like the fact that Sarge talked about stories this morning. I love a good story. As you're all L&D HR professionals, I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with the term verbal leakage. So that kind of idea that something about my being gives away what's happening for me internally. So it might be that if I'm nervous about something, my hands shake, my voice gets higher or squeakier, I start to breathe through my chest and not from my diaphragm, that kind of stuff. So we're all pretty familiar with that as far as, yeah. Do we also enjoy the really visceral nature of calling it leakage as well? I love that. There's something awesome about that, yeah. So in my role, where I work with a lot of graduate development programs, I find myself in the role of kind of program lead, and that's where I'll be asked to headline a program that's normally going to be modular and will be anywhere from like kind of 2 years to 3 years and longer if it's particularly if it's a finance one as well. It's kind of an unwritten rule with myself and my fellow facilitators that first kind of 10-minute intro to a graduate development program that runs over 2 years is where you set the scene. So that's where you've got the ability to have them, yeah? And that 10 minutes, you either win the crowd or you lose them completely. So, not a huge amount of pressure as far as that goes when you think about a 2-year or 3-year program as well. Typically, this kind of work is the kind of work that I've been doing for about 5 odd years. I come from a financial services sales background, but that became an interest in behavioural development. So not a huge amount of experience as far as that goes. So one of the first roles that I had, or one of the first opportunities I had to do that, found myself headlining a graduate development program, talking to somewhere around 120 graduates. So kind of 22, 23, fresh out of university. I'm a civil engineer, I'm an electrical engineer. I've got this amazing background. I studied art history at university, so I don't have that kind of background as well. I'm also in my 40s, it pains me to say. So getting ready for this kind of 10, 15-minute intro, all I've got going through my head the whole time is, how are you going to engage this group? You're in your 40s, you can't remember what it was like to be at university or to start a new career. How are you engaging with these people? You're not going to be able to tell them anything. A really interesting, probably one of the most amazing pieces of feedback that I received from my now boss but also one of the most daunting things I ever heard was she said to me, the entire team were unanimous in wanting you as part of our organisation. Massive amount of positive energy from that, huge amount of pressure. So somehow I kind of gritted my teeth, I clenched my knuckles, I got through that introduction. I'd like to say that it wasn't my best piece of work, it wasn't my worst piece of work as far as that goes as well. I found myself later on in the day, and we'll typically be with like a group of maybe 6 or 7 graduates for the duration of that first module. And it's all about, we've talked about it already, creating that environment that garners trust so that we can establish a good environment for feedback, recognition, that kind of thing. Typically for one of their first feedback exercises, I will say, you know what, if you don't feel comfortable saying this kind of thing to someone you've only just met, what I'll get you to do is just write it on a post-it. Put their name on it, write it on a post-it, give them the post-it. They can read it, they can reflect on it, they can digest it. If they want to ask you questions about it or explore it later on, they've got the opportunity to do that, but give them that piece of feedback. It's always a bit of a surprise when as a facilitator you're also given a post-it as well. That was the post-it that I was given. Didn't quite garner the response. I was like, that was the postcard I was given. Oh, yeah. So there was something about that really resonated for me. So I saw your initial presentation and I decided that I wanted to be part of your group. I wanted to explore that with you further. Now, this is either going to endear you to me further or it's going to creep you out slightly. I still have the post-it. So years on, I still have that post-it. It's probably one of my most cherished things at work as far as post-its go. I know, yeah, it's interesting for us, it goes. But why have I cherished that post-it? I'm going to come to that a little bit later on. What I'd like you to do, so again, I'm going to give you an opportunity for self-reflection. So in typical facilitation fashion, I like to think I ask more questions than give answers. You have the answers. It's just about an examination of what those answers might be. So the questions is I'd like you to think about the last time that you felt vulnerable at work. So I've given you the example for myself. And what I'd like you to take some individual reflection time on is how that made you feel. What was happening for you internally while that was going on? A huge tenet of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, recognizing what's happening for me internally while those situations are happening. What were the messages you were telling yourself? So typically in that situation, in a time of vulnerability, what are the kind of messages that go through your brain? How did you cope with that feeling? How did you deal with that? And did you talk to anyone? If you did talk to someone, it's a really interesting follow-on question as to what made it easy for you to talk to that particular person. So kind of this corner of the room, we talked about creating a trust environment. Who did you talk to? What made it easier to talk to that person about it? So if I give you maybe 2 or 3 minutes to think about that, think about those questions, try and be as specific as you can be with the feelings and the phrases as well. Okay? Thanks, Andy. Okay, so again, I'm going to give you an opportunity to have a chat to the person next to you. I'd like you to focus on the first two questions. So the feelings, specifically what were the feelings that you associate with that instance of being vulnerable at work, and the messages as well. So literally, what are the messages that are going through your head as far as that goes? So if I give you a couple of minutes again to have a chat to the person nearest to you, that would be brilliant. Okay, so again, ladies and gents, I'll jump in there. Don't worry about the microphone. It's okay. I won't hear back from the audience, so you don't have to worry about the microphones. That's okay. Yeah. So I'm not going to ask to hear back from you because there's a lot of you here, and I obviously want to give you more time to reflect on some other things as we move through the workshop itself. What I would like you to do, though, so a rhetorical question as far as this goes. So thinking about the feelings that you associate with being vulnerable at work, thinking about how you've already defined shame, so you've gone through and done that. It's a bit of a kidney punch rhetorical question, so I apologise in advance. You've thought about when you were last vulnerable at work. I'd like you to give some consideration as to the last time you shamed someone at work. So I'm going to leave that question with you. So why am I talking to you about vulnerability? So in the work that we do with a graduate community in particular, and it's been my experience that resilience is kind of the new thing. Clients come to us constantly and say, we need our people to be more resilient. We're looking for some resilience training. Can you give them some resilience training? You know, typically it's like, can you knock up like a 45-minute workshop that will make everyone within our organisation resilient moving forward? One of the reasons for this workshop, one of the reasons to do some more kind of reflection and research on the phenomenon of resilience as well. I guess it comes with some hard questions though from an organisational point of view. Organisationally, when we talk about resilience, so resilience is about creating people who can take a step back, can move forward with that. You know, we've talked about it this morning. It's about people who are comfortable to take a risk, an environment that allows that to happen, and then allows people to learn from that process. So, you know, Dr. Johnson talked about this idea of it's prototyping, it's not making mistakes, that kind of thing. Are we giving that environment? Or if we're being really honest with ourselves, are we demanding endurance from people? As an organisation, is it important for me that you bounce back as an individual? Or, as an organisation, is it just important for me that you endure? That you just keep soldiering on? Because as organisations, as individuals, as society, we endure all sorts of things. As an organisation, we endure workloads. We enjoy, you know, days that don't seem to end. We've talked already about the fact that a lot of us check our emails. The first thing we do in the morning is check our emails. We enjoy processes and procedures. We enjoy outcomes, and we expect our people to do the same thing. So in all honesty, are we actually looking for them to be resilient, or are we actually looking for them to endure as far as that goes? We've also got to acknowledge that if we don't create an environment that is a resilient environment, there's going to be an economic impact as far as our organisation is concerned. A lack of resilience, a lack of risk-taking, a lack of innovators who are prepared to put themselves out there means a drop in creativity. It means a drop in passion. It means a drop in enthusiasm. It means ultimately that our organisations become less effective, so the bottom line isn't met as far as an organisation is concerned. But we throw platitudes at it. How many of us, and I'm guilty of this myself as well, have said things like, but that's the way we've always done it. Or that's the process. How are we creating environments that allow a difference to thrive as far as that goes? So there's a whole bunch of different psychologists, authors, experts in the field that talk about one of the key elements of resilience is the ability to establish a really solid network around you, so a support network. So Robertson and Cooper, Clark and Nicholson, you know, the list goes on as far as occupational psychologists that have had a look at that. As far as support network goes, my argument when you think about vulnerability in that support network is you're looking for two things. So you're looking to create an environment where individuals feel free to be vulnerable. So, you know, we've used some great words like there's some courage in there. There's some trust in that as well. But also, are we creating people who are able to be around vulnerability? Are you able to sit there with that? The idea of empathy. Can I be there with you in that situation? Can I listen to that? And can I not go straight to the I'm the rescuer mode? Or I can fix that. How many times do we hear problems from our people, situations that they find themselves in, and the first thing we do is go to rescuer mode. I can solve that because of this. Or I can redefine what you should feel based on logic. I can give you 10 reasons why you shouldn't feel that way. Because the situation demanded this, there was time pressures. There's always time pressures, yeah? We've established that kind of stuff. How are we creating more resilience, more effectability within our organisations by creating those situations? So, again, as a typical facilitator, I've created a model. You also have the model on a postcard in front of you. So an exploration of the model itself, I guess, is organisationally and individually, where do you go first as far as a situation where vulnerability can be met or where that opportunity is available. So if we use the example that I gave you before of my address at the beginning of a graduate development program, that was kind of the event in the middle, was me giving that address. And on my left, your right, there was some vulnerability and some risk taken there, and the lady that gave me that post-it recognised that I would probably benefit from some empathy. I tried to get up there and do my best as far as that address goes. She recognised, and something in my physicality and the way I presented myself there, that there was probably something that I needed to hear. And I, in turn, recognised that I was vulnerable in that situation. So in front of that group of people, she took a risk, she gave me that feedback, and in front of that same group of people, I said, you know what? I did find that a bit unnerving. It was kind of the first time I did that. I wasn't really sure how it was going to go down, so I recognised that I was truly vulnerable in that situation. That then becomes the shared experience of that group of people. They see the response to empathy as recognition of vulnerability. And that shared experience then becomes the organisational or cultural experience. We recognise that if empathy is applied in any given situation, there's a real power in recognising your own vulnerability. So I'm a massive subscriber to this idea of the vulnerability of leadership. If you've read or seen anything by Brené Brown, I can't recommend her stuff highly enough. It's about this being truly vulnerable in that situation. In a lot of organisations, though, it's about whether we go the other way. So the other way, again, same empathy is applied. I get the post-it, fantastic. I somehow bat that back. So organisationally, culturally, what does that look like? You know, I don't need a 21-year-old graduate to feel sorry for me. Yeah, I'm a 40-year-old man. I can take care of myself. All this kind of stuff. Yeah. Or you know, a stereotypical British approach. Oh, go on, stop it. That kind of stuff. Yeah. We throw that stuff back. There's risk. There's inherent risk in giving people a compliment. There's inherent risk in giving people empathy. If my response to empathy is, I don't need that. Yeah, you've taken a risk and it doesn't need to happen. Then the subsequent experience is shame. If I put myself out there and recognise that people might need a thing, I listen to them and I'm kind of just with them in that moment, what happens is they throw that back in my face. They cover it up with terms like bants. Oh, mate, it's just bants, banter, all this sort of stuff. We use that one. You have to do this thing as well for some reason when you do banter. As we use that to cover up a whole bunch of stuff. The expressions we use on a day-to-day basis. With all due respect, I'm about to say something really disrespectful to you. Yeah? To be honest, I prefer it if you were honest all the time. Why in this one particular sentence are you going to be honest with me? Yeah. So again, it's a shared experience. I see if empathy is applied, shame is the result. So why the hell would I put myself out there and demonstrate empathy for a colleague? That becomes a shared experience. That becomes the cultural norm. The cultural norm is you don't show weakness because weakness is just that. It's weak. So in true facilitation fashion, I don't have a widget that I can give you. I have questions for you to consider both on an organisational level and on an individual level. I'll begin with the organisational questions. So the first of those, if you are really honest with yourselves, if you look from the top down as far as your organisation goes, what are you actually currently doing? Are we striving to create resilience, or are we just demanding endurance? Are we kind of wrapping it up in that resilience gift wrap because that's easier? So I think about the kind of the desire to create lots of mental health first aiders within our organisations. I was talking to a prospective client the other day who said, we've trained 200 of our people as first aid mental healthers. And that is brilliant. Don't get me wrong, that's a fantastic achievement to have that many people that are cognitive, that kind of stuff. But what happens, in my opinion, is if you do that, then you put the sole responsibility for your organisation's well-being on that 200 people. And what happens when those 200 people need support? And what happens when the people who are supporting those 200 people need support? And what happens when those people need support? You see where I'm going with this. If our organisation is in some way contributing to that, to the need for us to have mental health first aiders, we need to look at what the organisation is doing. So the next question is, how do you create that? How do you create an environment where vulnerability is encouraged? We use some great terms in here. There's some courage in that. It's kind of putting yourself out there. There's some exposure. It's about being open. How do we create that environment within the workplace? And more importantly as well, how do we create a workplace that discourages shaming? How do we kind of say that's enough is enough? As far as the terms, the things we do that promote this. So those might look like pretty huge questions because they're organisational questions. If we look at them from an individual context, some things to consider, some things that might help you as far as reflection goes, is to think about when you feel shame. What triggers me? What kind of situations do I find myself in where that's my response? That should hopefully then create some internal empathy. I recognise if that's how I feel in that situation, there's probably half a dozen people in the same room who feel exactly the same way. Yeah. Disappointed is totally my go-to trigger. I give you a get out of jail free card as far as that goes. If you ever want to just kind of hit me where it hurts, just tell me you're disappointed in me. Yeah. So work out what yours are and think about how that could reflect on the people around you. The other big one is role modelling. There is a distinct difference, in my opinion, between what I say and what I do. Organisations talk a mean game as far as what needs to happen, but are we role modelling that same behaviour? So in the interest of storytelling, another great story. So again, in that graduate development program, and one similar that I talked about earlier on, we kind of set a group of maybe 10 graduates up for a project week. At the end of that week, they're asked to report back to directors, chairs, kind of the top echelon as far as their organisation goes about that particular project. And it will be one that's real to that organisation, a problem they face. And I don't know if you can cast your kind of mind back to that. I still feel the same way whenever I talk to a CEO or a CFO. As at 22, this is quite a nerve-wracking experience for these people. So a group of grads got up that I was mentoring over that week, spoke in front of that group. They're all turned out in their best bib and tucker. Sorry, that means their best suits, whatever their clothes are. Yep. One of the guys in my group didn't have a tie on. And when it came to questions from the floor, the very first thing that the CEO of that organisation did was stand up and say to this kid, "Why are you not wearing a tie? What makes you think that you don't have to wear a tie?" Now, I don't know about anyone else, but even talking about that now, I just feel myself crumble inside. So needless to say, this grade was absolutely devastated that was kind of the salient point that they'd taken away from a project presentation that they talked over for a week. However, pan forward 6 months, next module, same CEO gets up to address the group at the beginning of the module. It's kind of that tense moment where all the facilitators are at the back of the room going, "Oh God, what is he going to say this time?" And the very first thing he did when he got up is he said, "I want to apologise to every single person in this room, and especially to that young man right there. Last time we were together, the first thing I focused on was the fact that he wasn't wearing a tie. How much of an idiot am I?" Massive risk involved as a CEO getting up in front of a group of your newly appointed graduates and telling them you're an idiot. But from a role modeling point of view, amazing lesson. If you make a mistake, you can declare in front of the entire organization that you've made a mistake, and that will be met with support, not with shame. This is an organization that embraces vulnerability, therefore I can demonstrate it because my CEO has done exactly the same thing. So how are you contributing to that as far as your role modeling is concerned? And the last question there is, are you listening or solving first? Where do you go? Are you listening to truly explore and understand what's happening for the people within your organization? Or within your life even? Or do you go to the solving place first? Because again, there's a lot of personal stuff tied up in that solving piece as well. I am the rescuer. This is what I do. I fix things. Maybe the first step is just being there and listening to that person, listening to the situation they find themselves in. Kind of roll up your sleeves, get in there and just be in that moment with them. So, coming back to my post-it. The reason why I keep that, why I've decided to keep that post-it, so for me, it demonstrates two really powerful messages. The reason why I've decided to keep that next to my computer for the last 5 years, it's not because I'm really, really creepy, or because it's the only complimentary post-it I've ever received. The first is, for me, it's a real demonstration of risk and vulnerability. So again, this was someone taking a risk to give me something that they thought I needed to hear when I was vulnerable. And the other thing is that has done more for my confidence as far as these kind of sessions are concerned than any other piece of feedback I've received. Because for me, that's about a real desire to want to explore and hear more from an individual based on your first impression of them. What questions have you got for me? I think I've got about 10 minutes for questions. 5 minutes for questions. Oh, all right. So, excuse me.
Hi. My question, you talk quite a lot about vulnerability. Should there be a balance? How much vulnerability should you show?
It's a really interesting question. For me personally, I think that's an individual choice. So based on your experiences, based on the relationships you have with the individuals around you, the great thing about it is you call the shots. Like, how much am I prepared to give away of myself in this situation? There is a really, I guess there's kind of a movement at the moment that talks more about how can I bring more of myself to work. This idea that if I'm less of myself at work, if I kind of put on, commercial Dan facade, that takes real energy. There's a lot of exhaustion. It's not sustainable as far as that goes. How do I bring more of that? So I think that's a key element there, is how much of myself am I prepared to be comfortable to demonstrate within my work environment. The term that's used is, am I adapting to my environment, or am I disguising within my environment? So in true facilitator fashion, I haven't really answered your question, but I've answered it with another question. It's down to you and how much you're prepared to do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'll go that one. Okay. Hi, Dan. Sorry. Do you find that there's a real male-female divide when it comes both to showing vulnerability and also the aim to fix a situation rather than listen?
Yeah, I think there's a degree of that. Personally, I try and steer clear of generalizations wherever possible. So in my household, the irony is that I'm the man and I get to talk about feelings all the time. That's basically what I do for a living. My other half is a naval architect, so she's an engineer. She runs her own engineering consultancy. She's the fix-it kind of person. So even to the point where we will have a conversation that begins with me saying, I'm not in the fix-it space at the moment. I'm in the I just need to talk to you about it space. So I think there can be some of that. Personally, I think it's something to be wary of, is making generalizations about that kind of stuff. It's more about whatever works for the individual. So kind of coming back to that, it's about you, it's about whatever that individual needs. Yeah.
I think in answer to your question about when is it right to show vulnerability and when it's not, I've got an example of, I was having a steroid injection into my wrist, a tiny needle, and the guy doing it was having to find a really small point, and we were talking about being new parents, and he was saying that he was surviving on about 3 hours sleep a night. Now, that didn't make me, and he was sharing that vulnerability with me whilst he had a needle poised above my wrist. So this didn't actually help me feel confidence in him in that moment of doing his job. So I think there's something around just thinking about the professional environment you're in. I think if he'd told me about it afterwards, it would have been absolutely fine. But at that particular moment, it made me feel very vulnerable that he was doing something to me. So I think there's a time and a place situation for it. So yeah, I think that was my reflection on it.
Did you talk to him about that, Joe? Did you say that that's how he made you feel in that situation? Would have been a great piece of feedback. Yeah. So you just need to recognise that if you're going to talk to me about that sort of stuff, it's probably going to make me feel a little bit uncomfortable as far as that goes. Yeah.
Hiya. In my old role, I did quite a lot around kind of bullying and harassment. And I think there might also be a bit of a tension in the kind of the wake of Me Too and everything we've seen that's happening in the call for asking people to be more resilient all the time. Are we also asking people to kind of tolerate behaviour that actually just isn't acceptable? I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, if you've had any clients that are kind of battling with that.
Yeah, so I think it comes down to that role modelling stuff. There's a lot of stuff that we tolerate that I don't think we should. So myself and Matthew were at a Women in the Workplace seminar a couple of weeks ago. My personal opinion is we should call that stuff out wherever we see it. As far as discrimination against women, it astounds me that 51% of the population are women, but we don't recognise that we call that diversity now. You're more than half of us, so that's not, in my opinion, that's not diversity. So I think that's a similar situation of recognising that there are behaviours that we now deem as unacceptable and just about calling that stuff out. I think it's too easy to cover stuff up and say, it's kind of just lighthearted, or it's joking, or it's banter and that sort of thing. We've got to be conscious of the impact that we have. We kind of kid ourselves a lot in saying that we don't have an impact on people. Everything you do, everything you say, in my opinion, has an impact on the people around you.
So just following on from that, how you talked about role modelling there, but when you are a woman in the workplace and the board is all male and that that kind of thing, how do you role model then? Because you've not got anyone to look at. Who else is sticking their head above the parapet and calling that out? Yeah. I just want, how do you think that we go about that?
So in true vulnerability space, I'm feeling a bit vulnerable as a middle-aged white man trying to talk to women about how they should do that sort of stuff as well. I think it's find whatever works for you. My feeling is that we don't necessarily have to pave the way for you. I'm sure you've got role models who do it, mentors who do it. Find a mentor, find a coach. Kind of some really key elements as far as that goes. Find a support network within your own community. So the number of graduate communities we see that set up kind of young talent groups themselves, young innovators, this kind of constant desire I want to go back and give back to people who are in high school so that we can get them into engineering, manufacturing, that kind of stuff. When I was that age, I didn't do any of that sort of stuff. It was just about just give me a paycheck on a monthly basis. So I'm in constant admiration and awe of that. So I think anything I can kind of tell you, Claudia, is going to be through a middle-aged white bloke lens. Whatever works for you. If you can and there are some amazing women as far as role models out there. Find them, approach them, and talk to them about kind of what you're finding difficult, and learn from what they've experienced as far as that goes. Yeah. How did I do with that one? Was that all right?
Okay.
Brilliant.
Done. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, time to grab a cup of tea, and then we're back here at 3:30.
Thanks.